If you trust someone with everything, make sure they haven't already decided what to do when you're gone. That was the first thing my lawyer said when I finally called him back. It was 7:12 a.m. when his email came through. No subject line. Just 5 words in the body. Call me immediately. Richard Hale had been my attorney for over 20 years. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't send urgent emails unless something had already gone wrong. I remember staring at the screen longer than I should have, the coffee in my hand cooling without a single sip taken. Outside, the morning was quiet. The kind of quiet you don't question until something breaks it. I dialed his number. He picked up before the second ring. "Daniel," he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not fear. Not exactly. Something measured. Controlled. "Tell me you haven't signed anything else this week." I frowned. Looked down at the folder on my desk. Cream-colored paper. My name typed neatly across the top. "I signed what Emily brought over on Tuesday," I said. "Just updates. Estate planning. Nothing unusual." There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough to feel deliberate. "Daniel," he said again, slower this time. "I need you to listen carefully. Do not sign anything else your daughter gives you. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until we sit down together. My daughter, Emily." The words didn't fit next to the tone he was using. Emily had been handling things for me since my wife passed 2 years ago. Groceries. Appointments. Paperwork I didn't feel like sorting through anymore. She made it easy. That was the word I used when people asked. Easy. I leaned back in my chair and picked up the top document from the folder. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Thicker. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice even. "You're going to have to explain what this is about." Another pause. This one longer. I could hear him shifting something on his end. "Papers, maybe. Or just time." "I reviewed the documents Emily had you sign," he said. "Not the copies she gave you. The filed versions." Filed. That word landed differently. I looked at the signature line. My name was there. The date matched. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. "And?" I asked. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. "And they're not the same," he said. The air in the room felt thinner. I set the paper down carefully. Too carefully. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "I read them." That wasn't entirely true. I had skimmed them. Trusted the explanations. Trusted her. "I know you think you did," he replied. "But there's an additional clause in the filed version. One that wasn't in the draft she showed you." I didn't speak. I just reached for the second page. My eyes moved faster now, scanning instead of reading. Paragraphs blurred together. Legal language. Familiar structure. Nothing obvious. Nothing loud. Then I saw it. One sentence. Half a paragraph, buried between 2 sections I barely remembered. Transfer of decision-making authority in the event of cognitive decline, as determined by a licensed medical professional designated by the acting trustee. I read it again. Slower. The words didn't change. "That's standard language," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Not like that. Not with that phrasing. Not with that placement. "Not the way it's written here," Richard said. "And not with the accompanying documents she's already prepared." Accompanying documents. My hand rested on the edge of the desk. I noticed it wasn't shaking. That was new. "What documents?" I asked. "A petition," he said. "Drafted but not filed yet. Requesting a formal evaluation of your mental fitness. If approved, it would allow her to assume full control of your assets and personal decisions." I didn't respond right away. I looked around the room instead. The same office I'd worked in for 15 years before retiring. The same desk. The same chair. My wife's photograph still sat in the corner, angled slightly toward where I used to sit every day. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Nothing looked different. And yet, "Daniel," Richard said, quieter now, "this isn't about managing your estate." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not long. Just enough to steady something inside me that hadn't fully shifted yet. "Then what is it about?" I asked. When he answered, he didn't hesitate. "She's not trying to take care of you," he said. "She's positioning herself to take control of you." I opened my eyes. Looked back down at the document. That one sentence. That one clause. It hadn't been there on Tuesday. I was sure of that now. Completely sure. And suddenly the past 6 months didn't feel random anymore. The extra appointments. The gentle suggestions. The way she'd started finishing my sentences before I could. I sat there in the quiet, the phone still at my ear, and understood something I hadn't been ready to see before. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan, and I had already signed the first piece of it. I did not call him back right away after that. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at that single clause as if it might rewrite itself if I gave it enough time. It did not. The words stayed exactly where they were, quiet and precise, doing exactly what they were designed to do. I set the phone down slowly and reached for the rest of the documents in the folder. There were 6 in total, all signed within the last 3 weeks, all presented to me as routine updates. I remembered each one, or at least I thought I did. Emily had come by on a Tuesday afternoon with takeout from the place on Maple Street. Chicken salad, extra dressing on the side, just the way I liked it. She had set everything out on the kitchen table before even mentioning the paperwork. We ate first, talked about nothing important. The weather, a neighbor who had moved out, a show she had been watching, normal conversation, comfortable, familiar. That was always her strength. She knew how to make things feel ordinary. After we finished eating, she wiped the table, laid out the documents in a neat stack, and explained each one in simple terms. Updates to the trust, minor adjustments, making sure everything was current. She had said it like that. Current. As if time itself required constant maintenance. I had nodded. Asked a few questions. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required more than a sentence or two to answer. She had a way of anticipating what I might ask before I even asked it. That used to impress me. Now, sitting alone in that quiet room, it felt different. I picked up the second document and read it more carefully this time. Every line, every word. My eyes moved slower now, not because I could not keep up, but because I was choosing not to miss anything again. The language was clean, professional, structured exactly the way legal documents are supposed to be. There was nothing obvious, nothing that would raise concern for someone who was not looking for it. But I was looking now, and once you start looking, you begin to notice patterns. The same phrasing repeated across different sections. The same type of authority transferred in slightly different ways. Not enough to stand out on its own, but together, forming something else entirely. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. This was not rushed work. This had been built piece by piece. Quietly. Over time. I thought about the first time she had brought paperwork to me after my wife passed. It had been about 3 months after the funeral. I had not been sleeping well back then. The house felt too large, too empty, like it was waiting for something that was not coming back. Emily had stepped in without being asked. She started coming by more often, checking on things, making sure I was eating, making sure I was not forgetting appointments. It felt like care. It looked like care. I had been grateful for it. I had told people how lucky I was. Not everyone had a daughter who showed up like that. I remember saying those exact words. Lucky. The memory settled into place with a weight I had not recognized before. I opened my eyes and reached for the third document. This one involved medical directives. Standard language, at least on the surface. But the more I read, the more I understood how carefully it had been structured. Not to take control immediately. That would have been obvious. Instead, it created pathways, conditions, scenarios where control could shift naturally, almost automatically, once certain boxes were checked. Cognitive decline, evaluation, recommendation, approval. Each step small on its own. Together, irreversible. I set the document down and looked toward the photograph on my desk. My wife had always been the one who handled details like this. She read everything. Twice. Sometimes 3 times if something did not feel right. She used to tell me that clarity was not about understanding what was written. It was about understanding what was not written. I had smiled when she said that. Told her she was overthinking it. She had just shaken her head and gone back to reading. I sat there for a long moment, thinking about that. About the things I had not read. The things I had trusted someone else to explain. Trust is efficient. That is the problem with it. It saves time until it costs you everything. I picked up the final document in the stack. This one was different. Shorter. More direct. It named Emily as the acting trustee under specific conditions. The same conditions outlined in the earlier clause. The same quiet trigger that shifted everything once it was activated. My signature sat at the bottom. Clean. Confident. Unquestioned. I studied it for a moment. The way the ink pressed into the paper. The slight angle at the end of my last name. It looked exactly like it always did. There was nothing about it that suggested hesitation. Nothing that suggested doubt. I had signed this willingly. That was the part that settled in the deepest. Not because I had been forced. Not because I had been tricked in any obvious way. but because I had trusted the person standing across from me when I did it. I reached for my phone again and looked at the screen. Richard's name was still there in the recent calls. I knew what he was going to say next. I knew what the next step was supposed to be. Do not confront. Build the case. Stay calm. Act normal. I had heard enough of that language over the years to recognize it now, even before he said it. I set the phone back down without dialing. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly how far this went. Because one thing was already clear. This had not started last week. And whatever Emily was planning, she was not finished yet. I did not need Richard to tell me what to do next. I had spent 40 years working as a forensic accountant. I had built a career on finding what other people missed, on following numbers when they tried to hide, on noticing patterns that did not belong. I had not used those skills on my own life in a very long time. That changed that morning. I gathered every document Emily had brought me over the past 6 months and laid them out across my desk in chronological order. The paper made a soft, consistent sound as it moved, a rhythm I recognized from years of sorting evidence. January, February, March. Each set of documents looked ordinary. On its own, minor adjustments, clarifications, updates. But when I stepped back and looked at them together, the pattern became clearer. Authority was not transferred all at once. It was divided into pieces. Financial decisions in one document, medical considerations in another, property oversight in a third. Each piece small enough to feel reasonable. Each piece justified with a simple explanation at the time. I picked up a legal pad and started writing dates in the margin. The first document had been signed 6 months ago, on a Thursday afternoon. I remembered that day. It had rained. Emily had commented on it when she walked in, shaking a few drops from her coat. She had said something about how the weather made people forget things. At the time, I had laughed. Now, the sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I wrote the date down. Then the next one. 3 weeks later. Then 2 weeks after that. The intervals were not random. They were tightening. The changes were becoming more frequent, more precise. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my bank statements. Paper copies. I still kept them, even after everything had gone digital. Old habits are hard to break. I spread those out beside the legal documents and began matching dates. The first thing I noticed was not a large transaction. It was a small one. $180. A charge for a consultation with a medical specialist I did not remember scheduling. I circled it. Then I found another. $240, 3 weeks later. Different name. Same category. Evaluation. Assessment. The words were vague, but they repeated. I sat forward in my chair and looked more closely. Over the past 4 months, there had been 6 separate charges. All for different providers. All labeled in similar ways. None of them had stood out at the time because they were not large amounts. They were easy to ignore. Easy to overlook when everything else in life felt heavier. I turned to my calendar. I kept a paper one on the wall, marked with appointments and notes. I scanned each of the dates I had circled. Some had entries. Routine things. Dentist. Grocery delivery. A lunch Emily had insisted we schedule. Others were blank. Completely empty. That was the part that did not fit. If I had seen a specialist, I would have written it down. That was something my wife had made sure of years ago. Every appointment went on the calendar. No exceptions. I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of the room. The metal handle felt cold against my hand. I opened the drawer labeled medical and pulled out the folder inside. Insurance statements. Receipts. Explanations of benefits. I flipped through them quickly at first, then slower as I began to see what I was looking for. The same providers appeared there too. The same dates. The same quiet pattern of visits I did not remember making. Each one marked as completed. Each one paid. I set the folder down and returned to my desk. The room felt different now. Not louder. Not darker. Just sharper. Like everything had come into focus all at once. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard's number again. This time, I did not hesitate. He answered immediately. I was expecting your call, he said. I think I know why, I replied. My voice sounded steady. More than steady. It sounded familiar. Like something I had not used in a long time. They are building a record, I said. Medical visits. Evaluations. Small, consistent, documented. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet exhale. Yes, he said. That is exactly what they are doing. I looked back at the documents spread across my desk. The dates. The charges. The signatures. It all aligned now. But I never went to those appointments, I said. That is the point, he replied. On paper, you did. I closed my eyes for a moment and let that settle. On paper, I had already begun to decline. On paper, professionals had already started evaluating me. On paper, there was already a narrative forming, one that did not match the reality I was sitting in. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph on my desk again. All right, I said quietly. Then we do this properly. Richard did not respond right away. He did not need to. He understood what that meant. I will need copies of everything, he said after a moment. Every document. Every statement. Do not confront her. Not yet. We build the case first. I nodded, even though he could not see me. I know, I said. And I did. Because for the first time since this started, I was not reacting anymore. I was working. And if Emily had been planning this for 6 months, then I would give myself the time to understand every piece of it before I made my next move. Because whatever she thought I was, whatever version of me she had built this plan around, she had made one mistake. She assumed I would never look closely enough to see what she was doing. And now, I was looking. I did not move anything on my desk after that call. I left the documents exactly where they were, spread out in front of me like a map I had just learned how to read. There is a moment in this kind of work when everything shifts. Not because new information appears, but because the existing information arranges itself into something you can no longer ignore. That moment had already happened. Now it was about confirming it. I started with the medical providers listed on the statements. 6 names. 6 different offices. All within a 30-mile radius. Close enough to be convenient. Far enough apart to avoid obvious overlap. I wrote each name down, then opened my laptop and began searching. The first 2 were legitimate. Licensed professionals. Clean records. The third took longer. The website looked real, but the address did not match the business registration. A suite number that did not exist. I noted it. Moved on. By the time I reached the 6th name, a pattern had started to emerge. Not all of them were fake. That would have been too easy to detect. Instead, it was a mixture. Real providers. Questionable ones. Enough legitimacy to support the illusion. Enough ambiguity to blur the edges. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the list again. This was not about one appointment. It was about building credibility over time. A paper trail that could survive scrutiny because parts of it were true. That is how you make something convincing. You do not invent everything. You anchor it in reality and let the rest follow. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent messages with Emily. There were dozens. Short, casual exchanges. Reminders. Check-ins. Photos of groceries she had picked up. Messages about appointments. That word again. Appointments. I stopped on one from 3 months ago. Do not forget, you have that quick. Check in tomorrow at 10. Just routine. I had replied with a thumbs up. No questions. No follow-up. I checked the date. It matched one of the charges. I opened my calendar again. Blank. No entry. That was not an accident. That was intentional. I set the phone down and folded my hands together on the desk. This was no longer about documents. This was behavior. Repetition. Reinforcement. She had been creating a version of my life that existed on paper, one that slowly replaced the real one without me noticing. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The house was quiet in a way that felt different now. Not peaceful. Controlled. I opened the cabinet and took out a glass, filled it with water, and stood there for a moment without drinking it. I thought about the past 6 months. The conversations. The small corrections she would make when I spoke. That was last week, Dad, not yesterday. You already told me that. Said gently. Said with a smile. I had accepted those corrections without thinking. Adjusted my own memory to match hers. That was the part that settled in slowly. This was not just about paperwork or appointments. This was about narrative. She was not waiting for something to happen to me. She was defining what had already happened. I set the glass down and returned to my office. The documents were still there, unchanged, waiting. I picked up the medical directive again and read the clause one more time. This time, I focused on a single phrase. As determined by a licensed medical professional designated by the acting trustee. I read it twice. Then a third time. Designated by the acting trustee. Not assigned independently. Not selected by a neutral party. Chosen. Controlled. That was the mechanism. That was how the entire structure held together. If she became the acting trustee, she chose the evaluator. If she chose the evaluator, she controlled the outcome. It was not a possibility. It was a system. I felt something settle into place then. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clearer. I reached for the phone again and dialed Richard. He answered immediately. I need to confirm something, I said. Go ahead, he replied. If she is named as acting trustee under these conditions, does she have the authority to select the medical evaluator? There was no pause this time. Yes, he said. And once that evaluation is completed, it becomes part of the record. From there, it is very difficult to reverse. I nodded slowly. So the evaluation is not the test, I said. It is the confirmation. Exactly, he replied. The decision is made before the evaluation ever happens. I looked down at the documents again. The signatures, the dates, the structure. It was all there. Quiet, precise, already in motion. Then this is not about whether I am capable, I said. It is about whether they can prove that I am not. Richard was silent for a moment. Then, yes, he said. I let that sit. Let it settle into something I could work with. All right, I said finally. Then we treat it like evidence. That is exactly what it is, he replied. I ended the call and set the phone down carefully. The room felt steady now. Focused. The uncertainty from earlier had been replaced by something else. Direction. I pulled a new folder from the drawer and labeled it in block letters. Evidence. Then I began moving the documents, one by one, into a new order. Not by date this time, but by function. Financial, medical, legal authority. Each piece placed where it belonged. Each connection noted. Each gap identified. This was no longer something happening to me. This was something I was going to document. Because the moment I understood the structure, the plan stopped being invisible. And once a plan becomes visible, it can be dismantled. But only if you are patient enough to see all of it first. And I was just beginning to see how far this actually went. The meeting with Richard happened that same afternoon. His office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown, the kind of place with quiet hallways and thick glass doors that closed with a soft, final sound. I had not been there in over a year. Not since we finalized the last revision of my will after my wife passed. He greeted me the same way he always had. A firm handshake. Direct eye contact. No unnecessary words. But there was something different in how long he held my hand this time. Not longer. Just deliberate. As if confirming something. Come in, he said, stepping aside. His office looked exactly the way I remembered it. Clean desk. No clutter. 2 chairs positioned. Across from each other with a small table between them. On that table sat a folder. Not mine. Thicker. Darker. He waited until I sat down before taking his own seat. Then he opened the folder and turned it toward me. This is what has been filed so far, he said. The first page was a summary. Dates. Document names. Filing references. Everything aligned with what I had already seen at home. But this was organized differently. This was structured for someone else to read. Someone who needed to understand the progression quickly. You said there were accompanying documents, I said. He nodded and flipped to the next section. Drafts, he replied. Prepared but not yet submitted. I leaned forward slightly. The paper made a soft sound as it shifted. The heading on the first draft was clear. Petition for capacity evaluation. My name appeared beneath it. Full legal name. Date of birth. Address. Everything correct. Everything precise. This would be filed with the court, Richard said. Once submitted, a judge reviews it and, if approved, appoints an evaluator. I read the first paragraph slowly. It described concerns about my ability to manage daily responsibilities, financial inconsistencies, missed appointments, confusion regarding timelines. Each statement was supported by examples, dates, observations, small details that, on their own, would not mean much. Together, they form something else entirely. This is built from the record she created, I said. Yes, he replied. That is why it is effective. I turned the page. The next section listed potential evaluators. 3 names. All licensed. All within the same network I had already seen on my statements. Selected by the acting trustee, I said quietly. Richard nodded. And if the evaluation supports the petition, control shifts immediately. I sat back in my chair and looked at him. How often does this succeed? I asked. He did not answer right away. He folded his hands together on the desk, mirroring the way I had done earlier at home. More often than you would think, he said. Especially when the documentation appears consistent. I looked back down at the pages. Consistent. That was the word. Not accurate. Not truthful. Consistent. There is a difference. She has not filed this yet, I said. No, he confirmed. But everything is in place. I let that settle. Everything was ready. All that remained was timing. Why wait? I asked. Richard reached for a pen and tapped it lightly against the folder. Because she needs one more piece, he said. Something that makes the transition appear necessary, not strategic. I felt my attention narrow. What kind of piece? I asked. He looked at me directly. An incident, he said. Something that can be documented as a clear sign of decline. Confusion. Forgetfulness. A mistake that can be written down and referenced. I thought about the past few weeks. The small corrections. The gentle reminders. The way she had started asking me to repeat things I had already said, as if testing whether my answer would change. She is waiting for me to give her that, I said. Or to create it, he replied. The room was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that comes when everything important has already been said. I looked down at the folder again, then back at Richard. So what do we do? I asked. This time, he did not hesitate. We let her believe it is working, he said. You continue exactly as you have been. You do not change your behavior. You do not confront her. And we start documenting everything from this point forward. I nodded slowly. That part was familiar. That part made sense. And the evaluation, I said. If she files the petition, then we challenge it, he replied. But we do it with evidence, not arguments. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled quietly. My hands rested on my legs, still steady. All right, I said. Richard closed the folder and slid it back toward his side of the desk. There is one more thing, he added. I looked at him. You need to understand the position she believes you are in, he said. She does not think you are paying attention. She does not think you are capable of seeing this. I held his gaze for a moment. That is her advantage, I said. And yours, he replied. I stood up, and he did the same. The meeting was over. No handshake this time. Just a nod. I walked out of his office and into the hallway, the sound of the door closing softly behind me. As I made my way to the elevator, I thought about what he had said. Not about the documents. Not about the petition. About perception. About what she believed to be true. Because if Emily thought I was not paying attention, then she would continue exactly as she had been. And that meant she would show me the rest of her plan without realizing it. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed, and for the first time since this started, I felt something settle into place with complete clarity. I was not reacting anymore. I was preparing. And whatever she was waiting for, whatever final piece she needed to move forward, I was going to be ready for it before she ever realized I had seen it coming. Emily came by the next morning at 9:40 a.m., 10 minutes earlier than she usually did. I noticed that immediately, not because it was unusual for her to be early, but because she had been consistent for months. Always within the same 5-minute window. Consistency like that is not accidental. It is practiced. Today, she stepped through the door with the same familiar smile, holding a paper bag from the coffee shop on Oak Street. I brought you breakfast, she said, setting it on the kitchen counter as if nothing in the world had shifted. I watched her move through the room with the same ease she always had, placing things exactly where they belonged, adjusting small details without asking. Control does not always look like force. Sometimes it looks like routine. You did not have to do that, I said, keeping my voice even. I know, she replied lightly. But I like to. She turned to face me, studying me for a fraction of a second longer than usual. Not long enough to draw attention. Just long enough to measure something. I had seen that look before. In interviews. In investigations. It was not concern. It was assessment. How are you feeling today? She asked. The question sounded simple. Casual. But the wording was specific. Not, how are you in general? How are you feeling? I picked up the coffee she had brought and took a small sip before answering. Fine, I said. Just a normal morning. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me a moment longer, as if waiting for something else. A hesitation. A correction. When none came, she smiled again and turned back to the counter. Good, she said. I was thinking we could go over a few things. Today. Just small updates. There it was. Not unexpected. Not rushed. Just the next step. Of course, I said. She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table, aligning it carefully with the edge. That detail caught my attention. Alignment. Order. Everything positioned exactly. People who do that rarely do anything by accident. I sat down across from her, the same way I had so many times before. The same chair. The same distance between us. The difference was not in the setting. It was in what I was seeing now. She opened the folder and slid the first document toward me. This is just a follow-up, she said. Nothing major. It keeps everything consistent with the last update. Consistent. The same word Richard had used. I looked down at the page, letting my eyes move slowly across the text without reacting to anything specific. Not yet. Not in front of her. Look straight forward, I said. It is, she replied quickly. Too quickly. Just making sure everything is aligned. Aligned. Another word that suggested structure. Process. She leaned back slightly, watching me as I read. Not reading herself. Not distracted. Focused entirely on me. Waiting. I picked up a pen and held it loosely in my hand. Not signing. Not refusing. Just holding it. Do you remember the appointment last week? She asked suddenly. The question came without warning, but not without purpose. I kept my expression neutral. Which one? I asked. The one with Dr. Kessler, she said. You mentioned you felt a little off afterward. I paused for a moment, just enough to make the silence feel natural. Then I nodded slowly. Right, I said. That one. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Not much. Just enough to notice if you were looking for it. He said it was nothing serious, she continued. Just something to keep an eye on. I nodded again, as if confirming a memory that was not actually there. That sounds familiar, I said. She smiled, softer this time. More assured. Good, she said. I just want to make sure we are staying on top of things. Staying on top of things. That was how she framed it. Not managing. Not controlling. Staying on top. I looked back down at the document and turned the page slowly. There it was again. Not the same clause, but the same structure. Conditional language. Authority. Shifting under specific circumstances. Subtle. Clean. Easy to overlook if you were not looking for it. I set the pen down on the table without signing. I might need a minute to go through this one, I said. She did not react immediately. Just watched me. Calculating. Then she nodded. Of course, she said. Take your time. But her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the table. Not impatient. Measured. Controlled. A rhythm. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than comfortable. You have been handling a lot of this, I said casually. I appreciate it. That was not a test. It was a statement. But I watched her response anyway. It is nothing, she said quickly. I just want to make sure everything is taken care of. Taken care of. Always the same language. Care. Support. Responsibility. Never control. Never ownership. That was the part that made it work. I nodded and picked up the document again, flipping back to the first page as if reviewing it more carefully. In reality, I was watching her reflection in the window behind me. Small movements. Subtle shifts. The way her posture changed when she thought I was focused on the paper. The way she leaned forward slightly when I paused on certain lines. She was not just waiting for me to sign. She was watching how I processed it, measuring whether I understood what I was reading. After a moment, I set the document down again and picked up the pen. My hand remained steady. I did not sign. Not yet. Everything looks fine, I said slowly. I just want to double-check a few things before I put my name on it. There was a pause. Longer this time. Then she smiled again, but it did not reach her eyes the same way. Of course, she said. That is probably a good idea. Good idea. Not necessary. Not expected. But acceptable. For now. I placed the pen back on the table and closed the folder gently. I will look it over this afternoon, I added. She nodded, gathering the papers without rushing. No problem, she said. We can go over it again tomorrow if you want. Tomorrow. That meant she was not done. That meant there was more. I walked her to the door, the same way I always did. She paused. Before stepping outside and looked back at me, her expression soft again, familiar again. Call me if you need anything, she said. I nodded. I will, I replied. She stepped out, and the door closed behind her with a quiet click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence settle back into the house. Then I turned and walked back to the table, opened the folder, and looked at the document again. The pattern was continuing. The structure was tightening. And now I knew something else with complete certainty. She was not just building a case. She was testing me. And she still believed I had not noticed. That afternoon, I did not review the document the way she expected me to. I did not read it once and set it aside. I broke it down, line by line, clause by clause. Not for understanding. For structure. I placed it next to the previous documents and began mapping the language across all of them. The same phrases appeared again, but not in the same order. Authority. Delegation. Conditional transfer. Each document added a layer, and each layer connected to the next with precision. This was not just legal drafting. This was engineering. I opened a new notebook and began writing everything out in sequence. Not dates this time. Functions. What each clause did. When it activated. What it depended on. Within 20 minutes, the outline was clear. The earlier documents created the foundation. Financial oversight. Access. Permissions. The newer ones were building escalation. Medical authority. Evaluation triggers. Decision thresholds. Each step narrowing the space until there was only one outcome left. I paused when I reached the final section of the new document. It referenced a follow-up evaluation, not the initial one. The second. That meant she was not planning to act immediately after the first assessment. She was planning to reinforce it, to make it irreversible. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. This was not about one moment. It was about creating a chain of confirmations that could not be easily challenged. I reached for my phone and called Richard. He answered on the second ring. I think she is planning for 2 evaluations, I said. Not one. There was a brief pause, then the sound of paper shifting on his end. Explain, he said. I walked him through the structure. The sequence. The dependency between the clauses. When I finished, he did not respond immediately. That is thorough, he said finally. It also means she is expecting resistance. I nodded, even though he could not see me. Or she is eliminating the possibility of it. I replied. Yes, he said. Either way, it tells us something important. That she is not improvising, I said. Exactly. I looked down at the notebook, at the clean lines connecting each step. Then we do not interrupt this, I said. We let it continue. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then, you are suggesting we let her complete the structure, he said. We let her show us everything, I replied. Every document. Every step. Until there is nothing left hidden. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, that is risky, he said. Only if we are not documenting it, I replied. He exhaled quietly. All right, he said. Then we document everything. After the call, I set up a small recorder on my desk. Nothing complicated. Just a device I had used years ago during field audits. Reliable. Clear. I tested it once, listening to the playback. The sound was clean. No distortion. I placed it inside the drawer, leaving it slightly open. Enough to capture conversation without being visible. Then I made 3 copies of every document I had. One stayed in the folder on my desk. One went into a separate envelope, sealed and placed in the back of the filing cabinet. The third, I scanned and uploaded to a secure drive, naming each file with the date and a brief description. Clear. Organized. Redundant. That was how you built something that could not be erased. By the time I finished, the light outside had shifted. Late afternoon. The kind of quiet that comes before evening settles in. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at everything I had arranged. The documents. The notes. The recorder. It all felt familiar in a way I had not expected. Not because I had done this before in this exact context, but because the process itself was the same. Observe. Record. Verify. Do not react. Not yet. The phone rang at 5:12 p.m. I looked at the screen. Emily. I let it ring once more before answering. Hey, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Did you get a chance to look at the paperwork? She asked. Her voice was light. Casual. The same as always. I did, I replied. I just want to go over a couple of things with you before I sign. There was a brief pause. Of course, she said. What do you want to go over? I glanced at the document in front of me. There is a section about follow-up evaluations, I said. I just want to make sure I understand how that works. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. It is just standard language, she said. Nothing to worry about. Standard. Always standard. I nodded, even though she could not see me. I figured, I said. I just like to understand what I am signing. Her tone softened slightly. That is a good thing, she said. We can go through it together tomorrow. Tomorrow again. Another step. Sounds good, I replied. We ended the call a few seconds later. I set the phone down and looked at the recorder in the drawer. It had captured everything. Not much. Not yet. But enough to confirm tone. Timing. Language. I closed the drawer gently and returned to my chair. Tomorrow, she would come back. With explanations. With more documents, most likely. And this time, I would not just be listening. I would be letting her talk. Because the more confident she became, the more she would reveal. And the closer she got to what she thought was the end, the less careful she would be. I picked up the pen from the table and turned it slowly between my fingers. I had not signed today. That mattered. But what mattered more was what would happen next. Because now, this was no longer about stopping her. This was about letting her reach the point where she believed she had already won. And when that happened, she would say things she had not planned to say. She would confirm things she thought were already secure. And I would be ready when she did. Emily arrived at 10:03 a.m. the next morning, 3 minutes later than the day before. I noticed that too. Not because it mattered on its own, but because changes in patterns always matter when you're tracking intent. She stepped inside carrying the same leather folder, but this time there was something else in her hand. A second set of papers, loosely held, not yet organized. That was new. Morning, she said, her tone light, controlled. I thought we could go through everything together today. I nodded and gestured toward the table. Sounds good, I said. She placed both sets of documents down, but only opened the one from yesterday. The second stack stayed slightly off to the side, within reach, but not yet introduced. That was intentional. It meant she was pacing the conversation, deciding what I saw and when I saw it. I sat down across from her, the drawer behind me slightly open, the recorder already running. She began where we left off, pointing to the same sections I had reviewed the night before. This part here is just continuity, she said, her finger tracing the paragraph without actually touching the page. It keeps everything aligned with your previous decisions. Aligned again. Always the same language. I nodded slowly, as if following her explanation, letting my eyes rest on the text without reacting to what I already understood. In the evaluation section, I said, keeping my tone neutral. That is just standard, right? She paused for a fraction of a second. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me. Yes, she said. It is just a safeguard. Safeguard. Not trigger. Not mechanism. Makes sense, I replied. I picked up the pen and tapped it lightly against the table, not writing, just holding it. She watched the movement. Not the pen itself. My hand. Measuring steadiness. Control. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, then asked, what happens after that evaluation? The question sounded simple. It was not. Her posture shifted slightly. Subtle. A small adjustment in how she Saturday, it depends on the outcome, she said. If everything looks fine, nothing changes. If. Conditional again. And if it does not? I asked. She smiled, but it was tighter this time. Then it just means we step in to help more, she said. We. Not she. Always framed as support. I nodded again, as if satisfied, then leaned back slightly in my chair. And the follow-up. I added, glancing at the second section. That is just to confirm things. This time, the pause was longer. Just a second. But enough. Yes, she said. It is just confirmation. I let that sit. Confirmation of something already decided. I looked down at the paper, then slowly turned my head toward the second stack she had brought. And those, I said casually, are those part of the same update? Her eyes followed mine, then returned to me. Just supporting documents, she said. Supporting. Another careful word. We can go through those after this. After this. Sequence mattered. She wanted the first document signed before introducing the next. That was clear now. I picked up the pen again, turning it between my fingers as if considering. Let us look at everything together, I said, just so I have the full picture. There was a pause, a longer one this time. Her eyes stayed on me, searching for something. A gap, a hesitation. When she did not find it, she nodded slowly. Of course, she said. She reached for the second stack and placed it in front of me. The top page was different from the others. Not a revision. Not an update. A form. Clean. Direct. Request for preliminary assessment. My name was already filled in. The date line was blank. I felt something settle into place as I read it. This was the missing piece Richard had mentioned. The incident did not need to happen naturally. It could be initiated, documented, created. This just schedules the evaluation, she said quickly, before I could ask. Too quickly. Nothing happens until later. Later. Always later. I nodded slowly, letting my eyes move across the page as if processing it for the first time. And who sets this up? I asked. I do, she said. Then, almost immediately, I coordinate it. Just to make things easier. The correction came too fast. Reflexive. I looked up at her, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Not confrontational. Just present. Right, I said. Of course. She relaxed slightly, but her fingers tapped the table again, that same controlled rhythm from the day before. I let the silence stretch again, then said quietly, "You have thought this through." The words were neutral, observational, but they landed. Her tapping stopped. For a moment, she did not respond. Then she smiled again, softer this time, almost relieved. "I just want to make sure everything is taken care of," she said. The same line, the same framing. But there was something else underneath it now. Confidence. Not cautious anymore. Certain. I nodded and looked back down at the documents. "It is thorough," I said. "It has to be," she replied, almost without thinking. Then she caught herself, shifting slightly in her seat. "I mean, it is important to get these things right." I let that pass without comment. Instead, I picked up the pen and signed the first document. Not the assessment form. Not yet. Just the update she had expected. The movement was deliberate, clean, controlled. She watched closely, her expression steady, but her shoulders relaxed again. Another step completed. Another piece in place. I set the pen down and slid the paper back toward her. "We will go through the rest this afternoon," I said. "I just want to take a little more time with these." She nodded quickly. "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." But her tone had changed. Not cautious anymore. Assured. She believed the process was working. She gathered the documents, leaving the assessment form on the table just a second longer before picking it up last. That hesitation was small, but it told me everything. That was the piece she needed. That was the one she was waiting for. She stood, smoothing the front of her jacket, and looked at me with that same familiar expression. "Call me if you have any questions," she said. I nodded. "I will," I replied. She walked out, the door closing softly behind her. I sat there for a moment, then reached into the drawer and stopped the recorder. The red light blinked off. I pulled it out and set it on the table, replaying the last few minutes. Her words, her timing, the way she corrected herself, the way she said it had to be thorough. I listened once, then again. Each time, it became clearer. She was not guessing anymore. She was finishing. And now, I had something she did not know existed. Not just documents. Not just patterns. Her own words. And she had given them to me at the exact moment she thought she was closest to the end. The next morning, I did not wait for Emily to arrive. I called Richard at 8:05 a.m. and told him I was ready. Not to react. Not to confront. To end it properly. There was no hesitation on his end this time. "Then we move today," he said. By 9:30 a.m., I was back in his office, the same quiet room, the same table, but this time there were more people. A second attorney, a court-appointed consultant. Not there to intervene yet, but to observe, to document, to confirm. Everything was prepared in advance, just as Emily had done. Only this time, the structure was not hers. It was mine. At 10:02 a.m., Emily walked in, exactly on schedule. She stopped for a fraction of a second when she saw the room, the additional people, the arrangement. Not enough to show alarm. Just enough to register that something was different. "What is this?" she asked, her voice still controlled, still measured. I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze without changing my expression. "We are going to go through everything together," I said. The same words she had used the day before. She looked at Richard, then back at me. "You did not tell me this was happening," she said. Not accusation. Not yet. Clarification. "I did not know I needed to," I replied. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, stepping further into the room. "All right," she said. "Let us go through it." She took a seat across from me, placing her folder on the table with the same careful alignment. Habit does not disappear under pressure. It reveals itself. Richard opened the file in front of him, not hers, but ours. "We are going to start with the documents filed over the past 6 months," he said calmly. "Then we will move to the drafts." Emily's expression did not change, but her attention sharpened. "I have already explained those," she said. "This is just routine planning." Richard nodded once. "That is one interpretation," he said. "We are going to review another." He slid the first set of documents forward. Not copies. Originals. With timestamps. Filing records. Side-by-side comparisons between what had been presented to me and what had actually been submitted. Emily's eyes moved across the pages, faster now. Not reading. Recognizing. "These are standard revisions," she said. Her tone remained steady, but there was a slight tightening at the edges. "Then we will move to the medical records," Richard continued, as if she had not spoken. He placed the statements in front of her. The dates. The providers. The pattern. These show 6 evaluations that Mr. Whitaker attended, he said. Do you want to explain how those were scheduled? There was a pause. This time longer. Emily looked at me. Not at the documents. At me. Measuring. Recalculating. He agreed to those, she said. We discussed them. I did not respond. I did not need to. Richard reached for another file. We also have his calendar, he said. And his personal records. None of these appointments appear there. Silence settled into the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. The kind that does not leave space for easy explanations. Emily shifted slightly in her chair, her posture still controlled, but no longer relaxed. That does not mean they did not happen, she said. It means he forgot to write them down. The words were precise. Chosen carefully. That was her position. That was the narrative she had built. Richard nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement. That is one possibility, he said. Then he looked at me. Mr. Whitaker. I understood. I reached into my folder and placed the recorder on the table. Small. Unremarkable. Until it was not. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Clear. Controlled. Unmistakable. It has to be thorough. The words landed without force, but they did not need it. They carried everything that had been hidden behind them. The explanation that followed. The correction. The shift in tone. All of it played back exactly as it had happened. Emily did not move at first. She did not speak. She listened. Every word. Every pause. Every detail she had not expected to hear again. When the recording ended, the silence returned, heavier now. Not uncertain. Defined. She looked at the device, then at me. The first real change in her expression appeared then. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Recognition. The moment when the structure she had built stopped being invisible. You recorded me, she said quietly. Not a question. A statement. I documented the conversation. I replied. My voice was steady. The same tone I had used the entire time. She held my gaze, searching for something that was no longer there. Uncertainty. Confusion. She did not find it. Richard closed the file in front of him. We are going to pause here, he said. This meeting is now part of the record. Emily did not respond immediately. She sat there, her hands resting on the table, still, composed, but no longer in control of the direction. The plan had not failed. It had been exposed. And that was something she had not prepared for. I looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with accusation, just with clarity. Because for the first time since this started, there was nothing left to interpret. Everything was exactly what it was. The meeting did not end with raised voices or sudden movement. It ended the way these things always should, with clarity settling into place where confusion used to live. Emily sat across from me, her hands still on the table, her posture controlled, but something fundamental had shifted. Not outwardly dramatic, not visible to someone who did not know what to look for, but it was there. The difference between someone directing the situation and someone realizing they no longer were. Richard spoke first, his tone calm, measured, unchanged. From this point forward, all decisions regarding Mr. Whitaker's estate and personal authority are suspended pending review, he said. No further documents will be executed without independent verification. Emily did not interrupt. She did not argue. That was the first confirmation. People who believe they are still in control push back. People who understand they are not, listen. I watched her as she processed what had just happened, not looking for emotion, but for adjustment. Recalibration. The moment when a plan collapses is not loud. It is quiet. Internal. She glanced once more at the recorder on the table, then back at me. You planned this, she said. Her voice was steady again, but the certainty had changed direction. No, I replied. I understood it. There is a difference. Planning is building something new. Understanding is seeing what is already there. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, her attention returning to the documents in front of her. The same papers she had controlled just hours earlier now sat outside her reach in any meaningful way. Richard gathered them slowly, deliberately, placing each one into a new folder. Not rushed, not symbolic, just process. There will be a formal review, he continued. All submitted materials, including medical records and supporting documentation, will be evaluated for accuracy and origin. Emily nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. That was all she could offer now. The consultant in the room made a brief note. The sound of pen on paper quiet but final. Everything was being recorded. Not just her words. The structure. The intent. The pattern. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly in front of me, the same position I had held throughout the meeting. There was no need to move. No need to emphasize anything further. The evidence had already done that. After a moment, Emily stood. Not abruptly. Not hesitantly. Just a controlled, deliberate movement. She closed her folder, though there was nothing left inside it that mattered, and looked at me one last time. There were no accusations in her expression. No apology either. Just recognition. The kind that comes too late to change anything, but still arrives all the same. I was trying to make sure everything was taken care of, she said quietly. The same sentence she had used from the beginning. The same framing. But now, it sounded different. Not because the words had changed. Because the context had. I nodded once. Not in agreement. Not in rejection. Just acknowledgement. Because at this point, the explanation did not matter. The structure had already spoken for itself. She turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. No one needed to. The outcome had already been established. The door closed behind her with the same soft sound it always made. Nothing about that sound had changed. Only what it meant. The room remained quiet for a few seconds after she left. Then Richard closed the final folder and looked at me. This will move through the system now, he said. It will take time, but the documentation is clear. I nodded. Time was not something I was concerned about anymore. Not in the way I had been before. Because this was never about speed. It was about precision. You handled that exactly the way you needed to, he added. I did not respond right away. Instead, I looked down at the table, at the space where the documents had been, now empty. Clean. Reset. I should have seen it sooner, I said finally. Richard did not correct me. He did not agree either. He simply said, you saw it when it mattered. I stood up slowly, adjusting my jacket out of habit more than necessity. The meeting was over. Not just this one. The entire process she had built had reached its end. Not because it failed. Because it was revealed. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just clearer. I walked to my car, taking in the same street I had parked on dozens of times before, noticing small details I had ignored in the past. The way the light reflected off the windows. The rhythm of people moving past without noticing anything unusual. Life continuing exactly as it always does, even when something significant has just ended. When I got home, the house felt the same. The same quiet. The same arrangement of things. But the meaning behind it had shifted. I walked into my office and sat down at the desk, looking at the photograph in the corner. For a moment, I did not say anything. I did not need to. Some things do not require words to be understood. I reached into the drawer and took out the recorder, holding it in my hand for a second before setting it back down. It had done its job. Not by exposing something new, but by preserving something that would have otherwise been denied. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. There was no sense of victory. Not the kind people expect. No satisfaction in what had been uncovered. Only clarity. And clarity, when it arrives this way, does not celebrate. It stabilizes. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The small moments. The overlooked details. The trust that had been given without verification. That was the part that stayed with me. Not what she had done, but how easily it had been allowed to develop. Trust is not a weakness, but it becomes one when it is not examined. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. For a long time, I had believed that control was something obvious. Something you could see when it was taken. I understand now that it is not. It is built slowly, quietly, in small, reasonable steps that feel harmless until they are not. And by the time you recognize it, the structure is already in place. Unless you stop and look closely. I turned back toward the room, toward the desk, toward the life that was still mine to define. The documents were gone. The plan had been interrupted. But the lesson remained. Clear. Unavoidable. I am Daniel Whitaker. And from this point forward, nothing in my life would be signed, accepted, or trusted without being fully understood first.